Thank you. Our seventh tradition states that every AA group ought to be fully self-supported, declining outside contributions. We will now pass the basket. This is a weekly literature or step meeting. Our format is a speaker is asked to talk no longer than 30 minutes. He or she spends 15 minutes on qualifying themselves and the other 15 minutes on either a composition from the big book or the step of the week, followed by group shares, discussions, questions until 7 p.m. We end the meeting with the Lord's Prayer or the Serenity Prayer, whatever the speaker chooses. You can find our past weekly meetings on our YouTube page called the Stay Alive Literature and Step Group Meeting. You can also find information about our upcoming meetings and other great stuff on the Doylestown Recovery Group Facebook page. Do not forget to smash the like button, subscribe, and share. This brings us to the speaker portion of the meeting, February 9th, 2026 in Doylestown, PA at the Monday night, 6 p.m., the Stay Alive Literature and Step Group meeting at St. Paul's Lutheran Church. Tonight's speaker is Steve, and he's going to be sharing his experience on Step 5, or composition from the Big Book. Let's give Steve a warm welcome.
Thanks, Karen. Hi, everybody.
Sure.
My name is Steve, an alcoholic and drug addict.
Hey,
everybody. This is an honor to be here. A little nervous, of course. But a great time for me to be talking about, the fifth step, which I'll get into. Coincidentally, I've had some thoughts of people that I had harmed in the past that I just kind of forgot about because it was so long. I thought, but they've been coming into my mind lately, and I've been talking to my sponsor about it, and I'll deal with a lot of that. And then today, I was reminded by a family member of all the damage that I had done, 20 years ago, 25 years ago, and it just still comes out in a rage. And so I got to work. So clearly, my higher power is working in my life, and I'm going to have to go back and do some more work on step 5. But what was my life like? I mean, I'll kind of go through a little bit of how I ended up here. I certainly earned my seat. Many people have horrific childhoods. Bad things happen to them all the time, and you can kind of look and say, "Oh shit, man! No wonder that's part of my friend's suit. If I curse, you just punch me, will you?"
Yeah, I will.
You can kind of justify, or you can kind of understand. Wow, that's how they ended up here, man. They had like a rough childhood. I didn't. I had I had a great childhood, man. It was solid. There was no big trauma. But even at a young age, I just felt a little different, like just so wound up, so much energy, and just this constant yearning, I guess, to be the leader of the pack or the star of the show. Call it whatever you want. Always had to be the center of attention, and if I wasn't getting the center of attention, I would cause trouble in the house and become the center of attention. But I was one of 6 kids. Lived on a hill on a cul-de-sac. Mom was home raising 6 kids. It was like the stuff you read about in storybooks. It was a good childhood. Right next to me was a park. I wasn't having, I didn't start drinking and drugging until, late grade school, 13 or 14. But I had a good childhood. But despite that, I started drinking and drugging. It was all bets were off. But and I'm going to get into step 5 and talk about that and how I worked through, some of the things that contributed, some of my defects of character and those that I wronged and things like that. But genetically, I believe that if you have a person that's got a genetic predisposition, I mean, you got it in the blood, you got it in the genes through hereditary, and/or you've got the time, and/or you've got the money, and/or you've got the reasons why to go out and start drinking. But when I started drinking, I mean, it just felt great. It felt like I was King Kong. I could accomplish anything. And as a result of that, I got in a lot of trouble. I was always racing cars, picking fights, walking around parts of the city I shouldn't have been in at 2 in the morning or whatever. Snowstorms, raining, summertime, it didn't matter. I mean, this snowstorm we had 2 weeks ago, I was thinking, people are not driving. I used to be out driving in that kind of stuff. if I wanted to drink, I went to go to the bar, I went to go to the city, I went to get my stuff. It didn't stop me. I was still driving in it. But now as we get older, you think twice about driving in that kind of stuff. But so I started drinking 13, 14, in late 7th or 8th grade, whatever it was. No real big episodes. But I knew that once I started drinking, if I drank the beers or the bottle fast, it would have an immediate impact. And boy, once that thing in the back of my head clicked and said, wow, this is having an effect, it's time to go crazy. Crazy I'd become. And a lot of my drinking and drugging, well, mostly was drinking for a long time, was fun, but there was always episodes and consequences, starting at a young age. And I'm going to go past some of that. But I went to graduated high school. I went to school in Texas for a year. That was an interesting situation. I came out of high school as a good athlete, pretty good student. But my father thought that I would benefit from another year of college prep. So he sent me to a military boarding school run by a bunch of ex-Marines. I thought football camp was tough. Let me tell you, these guys were like ex-Okinawa, they did their time in the battles, and now they're running this military boarding school for misguided youth. And there I was, right? And this was 1979. The year of Donna Summer and disco dancing and all that crap. You see this stuff on Instagram, people with the fancy shirts and the skin-tight pants, and I get off the plane in Harlingen, Texas. If you look at Texas, and here's the bottom of Texas, and there's a little spot right before it hits Mexico. That's where I was, in the middle of summer. And I get off the plane, 18, 19 years old. I got my bling on, I got my silk shirt, my disco pants, hair's all slicked back, and I'm thinking I'm going to go. He told me I was going to Padre Island, some resort down there to cool off. He didn't tell me that it was a military boarding school. Somehow in my drunken escapades in high school, I signed an application to go to this military boarding school. And I'll never forget, I get off the plane, I'm walking towards what I thought was the resort, and it didn't look too good. It was like an airplane hangar or something, and I'm walking carrying my suitcase, and I see these guys in these Marine Corps uniforms. And they're like, are you Jones? I'm like, yeah, what's up? I'm like, I'm like, yeah, whatever. And they're like, welcome to the Marine Military Academy. Handed me this letter that I had signed, and it was also a letter from my father, And I was like, oh, man. I turned around, I went running towards the plane, to get back on the plane. And the guy grabbed me, and he said, son, I hear you're a good ball player. Let's see what you got. And if after 2 weeks you don't like it, I'll send you out of here. So that was the beginning of both a lot of growth and getting to know who I was, but also a lot of drinking. Because down there, we were in school during the day and academics. It was a pretty tough program. It was actually also designed to prepare you for some tough colleges later in life. And but on the weekends, man, we weren't drinking beer and mixed drinks. We were drinking like Everclear and shit like that, So, hardcore alcohol. And we were drinking with some of the DIs, the drill instructors, and it was a wild time, a year of that. But it was so competitive too, and I loved every minute of it. During the week, work, football, academics, sports, Vespers, which is religious services at night, and study hall, and then boom, go to bed. And we did that 5 days a week. And then the weekends, man, we just painted the town black. And then ended up coming back here into Philly and went to school, and I went to college in Philly. And this was early 80s. I started working in restaurants. I went to school during the day, and by coincidence, I ended up in a good major in technology, and I had a girlfriend at the time, and she had her stuff together, and she gave me some advice on what courses to pick and how to do the dual major and all this kind of stuff, and somehow I graduated. But the point is, I started work. During the day, I'd go to school, I'd go to class, but at night I was in the restaurants. And restaurants back then, I don't know if they still are like a cesspool for drugs, immorality, disease, all the things that, you know, are bad for us, but I loved it. I loved it, man. I'd walk into the restaurant at 5 o'clock at night, and it was, you know, you had a full-piece tuxedo on, cummerbund, and it was a fancy restaurant where you took care of all these, you know, served all these rich people, and I was making money and had cars and clothes, and I paid for my whole college. But boy, we drank like every night after work. And, you know, that kind of stuff went on. Somehow I graduated. But after doing that, I did the 5-year college plan because I totally bombed the first year and had to repeat all over. And, I mean, it was just bad. And, but when I graduated, by that point, all I knew was go to school during the day, work, and then party at night. Now I'm graduated and I had a job, you know, working 9 to 5. What do you do? What do you do at 5 or 6 o'clock at night? Well, I went to the bar. And that's where it really began. Mid-20s, late 20s. And I would just go to the bar like every night. And I'd always say, I'm just going to have like 2 Tanquerays or something. I'm just going to have 2 of this or 2 of that. But by the second or third drink, I could feel it click in the back of my head. And it was like, you know, Chucky's out of the box. You know, like, yippee-yi-yi, here I come. It didn't matter, you know, if I smashed up a car. That was just a pretty common thing. I got a job selling technology up and down the East Coast. And I traveled all over the country, you know, Atlantic to the Mississippi, everything south of Pennsylvania and Ohio. And it was a time when software was becoming, you know, the big thing, and I did that for a number of years. But I would pride myself on knowing where the rough sections of the city were. I could end up in Atlanta, Chattanooga, Nashville, Charlotte, North Carolina. And, you know, I wouldn't be able to tell you about the arts and cultural district. I could tell you where the hood was, because that's where I would go. I'd pull into a hotel after I'd get off the plane. Somehow I'd have a couple of drinks on the plane, a couple of drinks. God Almighty, this is flying. You know, and I would always end up in the bad section of the neighborhoods. A lot of escapades. Too many escapades. It was way out of control. And I was one of their top salespeople. I ended up, by that time, then I got promoted and lived in Los Angeles. First class apartment on the beach overlooking the Pacific Ocean. And they had moved me out there to train all the salespeople how to sell this stuff. But after 6 months, I crashed and burned. And they said, you're too much. You need to go home. And I went to rehab. Went to rehab once. They were crazy, so I left after 2 weeks. Got into more trouble after a couple months. I went back to rehab. And that's when it began. Okay, so I went to rehab, did well, went to halfway house for 5 months, did well, liked it. I went through another 2.5 years of in and out, in and out. Okay, so my point is, some people are very fortunate that they get the program the moment they're exposed to it. That wasn't my case, and I know it's not the case for a lot of us. It took, once I decided, and it was made obvious, that you're out of control, and you need to stop, you need to deal with this. It was a conscious decision. I knew I needed to deal with this. It took a while. It took me a few years of getting 30 days or 90 days or 60 days and going out. That went on for a while. I then put together periods of time where I'd have 5 years, and I went out. 2 years and I went out. That period of time was about 17, 18 years. That ended 20 years ago. So now I'm looking like 20 years in the program without a drink, without a drug. Okay. What have I been doing since? So even though I came into the program in my late 20s, okay, I had these periods of time for the first 15 to 20 years of having some sober time and then going out. And that was I could analyze that, but I'm not. The fact of the matter is I had never really accepted the program. I had never really accepted that I needed to live this way of life. I never really had done the steps. I had never really embraced all that the program has to offer. In rehab back then, everybody went for 28 days, and you blew through the steps too quick. But this time, for the past 20 years, I've done a lot of things differently. First off, I start my day every day sitting in a chair, having a cup of coffee. I have a teeny-weeny little house. I sit in this chair and I open up the slider and I smell that fresh air coming in. And I think to myself every day, man, I got it good. I'm alive. I'm not supposed to be alive because of the places I went, the cars that I smashed, the people that I was with, you name it. And so my life today is dramatically different. I'm not the same person I used to be. That person had no moral compass, was just a train wreck. Today, I'm the person that people count on. My children, my grandchildren, I'm very fortunate to have good relationships with my 3 children on most days. My grandchildren, I have 5 of them, soon to be 6 maybe. They like their grandpa, right? I'm real involved in their life. But this life that I have, it's not because of Stevie the Great. It's because I chose to accept the program. I chose to try to work the program far more than I had ever done. I start my day with prayer. But before I even begin to pray, I go down a list of gratitude. I smell that fresh air coming in the morning, and I think, boy, you got it made in the shade. You're alive. You're in your house. You're having a cup of coffee. You had a great day yesterday. I got all kinds of problems, just like everybody else. But my problems are poo-poo compared to the problems I get when I start drinking. Because when I start drinking, look out, right? So my day is all about gratitude in the beginning. And then I pray to keep up my relationship with my higher power. I pray that I never forget who's in charge, because I'm not. I pray to maintain a peaceful, civil, Christian-based lifestyle. I pray that I don't drop the F-bomb too many times during the day. I pray that I don't, look at women lustfully throughout the day. I pray that I don't lie, cheat, steal in my job. And I could do that all day long. I work from home. My boss, I hardly ever see him. I could hide. I could manipulate the expense reports. I could do a whole lot of things, but I don't. When it came to doing the steps, I had felt 5 or 6 years ago that, man, something is just missing. I was going to a lot of meetings. I was praying. I was asking my higher power for help and guidance, and a lot of things were working. I was still sober. I was still feeling good, but something was missing. And I realized, although I had a sponsor, he and I had never really formally gone through the steps. And he had offered, but I was like, I'm kind of busy. We'll deal with that later. But and this is not recommended. It is recommended you do the steps, early on. But everybody's story is different. At that time, we began to work through the steps, and the way that I did the steps was we spent time. And I'm one of those guys that don't overload me with too much. You can't change my lifestyle too much too quick, or whatever you want to call it. We worked through the big book. We worked through the steps, and it took probably 2 or 3 months to go through the steps. And when it came to step 5, I really, for a long time, I carried a lot of guilt of the damage that I had done, not just to myself, okay, but the damage that I had done to people, to others, to those that I cared. My parents, oh gosh, what I put them through, all those sleepless nights. I stole so much money, I paid it all back. So in the end, when I really got straight, I owed many thousands of dollars back. This was a long time ago, to the IRS, to FIA, Pennsylvania Higher Education Assistance Agency, student loans, credit cards, state of California taxes. I owed so much money. I try to evade the tax, all this kind of craziness. But my father stepped up and bailed me out, right? And with a loan. But when you get sober, you become more responsible. And as part of my recovery, I paid all that back. I made it a priority. And it was a lot of money, but it took years to pay that back. When it came to step, when I think about admitted to God, to ourselves, and to another human being, the exact nature of our wrongs, when I think about step 5, the way that I did is I wrote down, things that I really was tearing me apart and never really talked about. And I worked with my sponsor. How do I make these amends? My parents were, by that point, both were dead, right? My father had just died a few years prior. My mother had been dead 15 years prior. How do I make amends to my parents? And although I was living a good, clean Christian life, how do I make amends? How to make amends to my children? And one by one, we just sat down and we talked about how to make these amends. And some of them, I was able to approach people. The banks that I stole, the banks that I ripped off or screwed over, they had already been paid. The IRS had been paid. The government had been paid. But my children, when they were younger, they never saw me drinking and drugging, but they felt the consequences of my drinking and drugging. By the way, I would treat my who was my wife at the time is now my ex-wife, and we're actually pretty good friends. What I put her through. So I talked with my ex-wife, and I told her, I felt bad, even though I could say, you did this or you did that. I felt bad about what I did to her. I felt bad at what I did to my children, and deprived them at times of peace. My kids were, at the time, 3, 6, 10. They didn't need to hear some psycho screaming in the house at 4 o'clock in the morning, breaking chairs, smashing, and jacking my wife up against the wall. Who do you think you are? It's mine. I'll do what I want. What kind of a guy is that? That's not a guy. That's a punk. And I was a punk, right? So how do I make amends? How do I make amends to these people? I live a good life. And I am the guy that, my ex-wife to this day counts on. She's raising 2 of our daughters and 2 grandchildren. And I'm trying not to say like I'm the greatest guy, but I'm not. But I'm the one that people count on. I help my ex-wife. I help my grandchildren. I'm involved. I set the example. And boy, and a lot of times I'm reminded of things that I've done wrong. And when it comes up, like, I'll never forget what you know what? You're right. I have to say I'm sorry to my ex-wife many, many times. Today, for the first time in a while, I was reminded by one of my kids, like, it was some pretty rough words about what he experienced, when I was out there drinking and drugging on a relapse, and the horrors that existed in that home when I wasn't around for 3 or 4 days and my ex-wife was losing her mind. She didn't sign up for that. She didn't sign up. She married me, but there was so much turmoil. But the way that I admit to God, to myself, and another human being the exact nature of my wrongs. I've contacted old friends. I recently contacted a guy. I was the best man in his wedding, my best buddy. We were also drinking buddies. But he'd come home at 12 o'clock or 2 o'clock in the morning. I'm like, going home? I'm just getting started. And he went on to get married at a young age and had this amazing career and has this, he's very financially well off. And I've kind of kept my distance because I felt uncomfortable around him because I didn't experience all this, this tremendous lifestyle that he has experienced as a partner in a big law firm, and he's got houses all over the country. But, and I felt uncomfortable approaching him, but something was telling me, you need to reach to him and apologize. Because at his wedding, I don't remember his wedding, but I was the best man. I was the best man in the wedding. And I know what happens when I drink. And I recently, within the past couple of months, saw him for the first time in 10 or 15 years. And I said, I'm sorry that I've not reached out to you before. How much time we got? About 2 minutes? Okay, 2 minutes.
A good 5.
Huh?
Yeah, a good 5.
All right, 5 minutes. I said, his name's Brian. I said, Brian, I'm sorry, because he's been going through some medical stuff, and we were best buddies. I said, I'm sorry I was never there to help you get through this medical stuff that you've been going through. Real bad cancer type stuff. And I said, at your wedding, I was the best man. I remember the best man. I remember giving a speech of some sort or a toast, but I don't remember anything after that. Did I make a fool of myself? Was I a jerk? Because I really think I probably was. He said, no, you weren't. There was many other times that I embarrassed the hell out of him and his family, and I would, but the way that I'm trying to, continue to make amends, and is really through not just the formal procedure of writing things down, contacting old friends and family, some of the financials, Oh, here's the greatest. Here's what a nice guy does. When I was out there running hard, drinking and drugging, I had an American Express card, and I used to use it for travel. I'd put a couple $1,000 each month on it, and I would turn in the expense reports and get the money back. But I wasn't paying American Express. And in the end, they said, "Oh, you owe like." The American Express came after me for like 20 grand. This was like 20 years ago, and I was like, good luck trying to get that money from me. I ain't paying you. They said, "Don't worry, we're going to get it from your father." I said, "How are we going to get it from your father?" They said, "He co-signed on your card." So imagine this. My father was 67, 68, just retired or getting ready to retire. And here he's got to come up with 20-some thousand bucks to pay off his son, or my father's got to face all kinds of consequences. That's the kind of stuff that I would do. But I paid that back. You can pay it back. The greatest gifts that I got in doing a lot of the amends was, as a father, you don't sit down with your kid and say, "Yo, I'm sorry," but I had to sit down with my kids and say, like, and like the one, she couldn't talk. Excuse me. She couldn't talk to me about it. So we would use dolls to communicate. So I kind of got past that. It's taken a while. But she was so bent out of shape about what I did that it was hard for her to talk to me about it. So, excuse me. So I would pretend to be a doll, and she would be a doll, and we would talk, and we got past that. But with the children, they were most affected, and so the way that I excuse me, I just work through that is I just try to continue to be a good dad, far from perfect. And when I'm reminded of the pain and misery that I've caused, don't be like, "I'm your father, you can't talk to me like that." I say to them, "No, you're right. I'm sorry." And it still goes on. It pops up every now and then, and when it comes, I don't run from it, I deal with it. And the greatest thing is, and I'll wrap up in just a second, was my parents. Let me tell you, not only we all have stories of the horrors that we caused, but in the end, they saw me get sober and straight, and they were very proud of the person that I had become. I had become a good father, a good worker, a Christian, a person that keeps God centered in their life, and now, the gifts that I have are literally amazing. I now sit in Sunday church, with my ex-wife in the same row, and my kids, and my one granddaughter, who's, like, if you had told me a few years ago that you'd be sitting in Sunday church with your kids and your grandkids all praising God and singing God and having a blast, I'd say that's just never going to happen, but it happens. I could go on and talk about the gifts, but I think you kind of get it. It wasn't easy. It took a while for me to shape up. I had a few, slips early on, call it whatever you want, relapses, but I believed in the program. I had met a lot of people in the program early on that had this zest for life, or they had an aura about them, and that's what I wanted. I wanted that. That's all I was chasing all along, but and the longer that I stayed, and lastly, I don't work a perfect program. Do you think I call my sponsor every day? No. Do I drop a couple curse words here and there? Do I have lustful thoughts every now and then? Do I think I'm too tired to go to church? Absolutely. Do I skip a lot of meetings sometimes? Sometimes. But the one thing I do is I do a lot of things right. I continue to work the program, right? I continue to talk to my sponsor. And the biggest thing is when I'm wrong, I admit it, and I bring it up and I let my sponsor sort through it with me. I could go on, but thanks for letting me share.
We have come to the part of the meeting we were open to the floor for shares, discussions, and questions. Limit your time to 3 minutes. Please Try and keep your conversation to the literature stepper shared by the tonight's speaker. If you feel like drinking or if you had a drink today, please see me or speak to someone after the meeting. Now we'll open it up.
My name is Jason. I'm an alcoholic.
Hi,
Hey,
Jason.
Jason.